So fair warning, what I'm about to say might be a little controversial. It might be controversial, especially given the rapid expansion and subsequent longevity that Christianity has had. Jesus, at least as we see him presented here in the Gospel of Mark, is unquestionably awful at advertising. In the time leading up to the passage that we heard today, Jesus had developed quite a following through his ministry of teaching and healing. People were so enamored of him that crowds had started following him all around. This would be the perfect time to capitalize on all of that. The perfect time to galvanize this group of tentative followers into a committed movement. Now, I'll confess, I have never worked in advertising, and I have never planned grand strategy for a political campaign of any sort. But it seems to me that this would be the moment to use lofty rhetoric to unveil an exciting plan for the future while the disciples quietly walk around the crowd passing out focus group tested signs with phrases like "Jesus for Messiah" written on them. But instead of any of that, Jesus talks about how he's going to suffer. He predicts that those in authority are going to reject him. And before anyone can stop him, he tells everyone that he is going to be killed like a criminal and then rise from the dead. It's no wonder that Peter, who had devoted the last couple of years of his life to following him, pulled Jesus aside to say, "What are you doing? This is not how you build confidence. This is not how you build a movement. Come on." This is certainly not where I thought any of this was going. And instead of responding to Peter's fairly reasonable logic, he calls him Satan and tells him to get out of the way, and then doubles down on everything. He goes so far as to say to the gathered crowd that the only way that they can follow him is to deny themselves and take up their own crosses. This was an outrage and a scandal. It was unthinkable that God could act in this way, unthinkable that God would act in this way, unthinkable that the Messiah would arrive in anything but triumph. Unthinkable that the all-powerful God who created the universe, who liberated the Israelites from Egypt, who later restored them to Jerusalem, would choose to act in such a disgraceful way. This was not how the Messiah was supposed to come. The imagined glory, the mighty works, and defeated Romans replaced with the prospect of rejection, humiliation, and death. In the eyes of his closest followers, Jesus went from the Messiah everyone was waiting for to an embarrassment in an instant. From mighty conqueror to unmentionable scandal. The suffering and cross that Jesus speaks of are just as scandalous today as they were in Jesus' time. Personally, I find myself more comfortable contemplating the mysteries of Christ's incarnation, his earthly ministry and teachings, and the post-resurrection accounts than I am contemplating his betrayal, his suffering and death. And I doubt I'm alone in that. It's almost as if we want to bracket out those parts of the story to say, yes, they're necessary. They're part of the story after all, but let's not dwell on them. The concept of a humiliated God makes no more intuitive sense to us humans today than it did 2,000 years ago. And that fact makes the follow-up to Jesus' rebuke of Peter all the more important for us to pay attention to. If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. It is easy, especially in this season of Lent, to hear calls to deny ourselves as calls to take up something similar to a more rigorous Lenten discipline. But that's not what this is all about. Not really. Jesus isn't asking those of us who follow him to enter into a life in which we beat ourselves up constantly. He's not asking us to spend our lives wearing hair shirts and living alone in the desert. Instead, he's inviting us to get out of our own way. He's inviting us into a new life with a new set of priorities. A life that will allow us to die to ourselves and find new life in God. Denying ourselves and taking up our cross isn't about continually punishing ourselves. It's about being continually transformed and molded into living, breathing icons of Jesus Christ. When I was a kid, I had regular contact with a group of men who took this call to self-denial to extraordinary lengths. There was a group of Episcopal Franciscans that made their home not far from where I grew up on Long Island. From time to time, we would visit the friary, or one of the friars would come visit our home. Every time I met one of them, I found myself in awe of these strange men in their brown robes. There was a sense of joy that was palpable across the grounds of the friary, and it seemed to follow them wherever they went. Now, at that point in my life, all I knew about them was that they went to church a whole lot, had really, really tasty bread that they baked, and that Brother Dunstan was excited about playing with toy trains as I was. When I got older, my sense of awe of these friars only grew. Dunstan told me that after the Second World War, he realized that a Franciscan is what he needed to be. He said that he didn't think he was able to follow God like he needed to out in the world. He gave up the possibility of a career, a family, and the ability to make big decisions on his own so that he could follow Jesus. He gave up everything. Dunstan, however, would say that he got the better end of the deal. That the rich life that he lived, splitting his time and his work between ministry in Trinidad and ministry on Long Island, would never have been possible had he not given up everything else. And while for most of us, the self-denial that we are called to won't look quite so drastic as all that, it can be equally transformational. In denying ourselves, in taking up our cross and dying to the world, we begin to see the world with new eyes. It becomes easier and easier to see the face of God in those that we meet on the street, in our offices, or coming through that door. And with that new vision comes the drive to start acting in a way that might cause a friend to pull us aside and ask, "What are you doing?" And a desire to start making our own scandals as we fall into step with that great line of saints following Jesus.